Ryan's office revenge.
By 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, the company I'd given 7 years of my life to had just lost $11 million. I was already on the highway home, base fishing gear loaded in the truck. They never saw it coming, but honestly, they should have. My name's Garrison Wells, 47 years old, and until that morning I was the senior operations director who kept their biggest defense contract from falling apart with nothing but precision engineering and a shop rag in my back pocket. You know what? Nobody tells you about being the guy who actually runs things. You become invisible. Not the good kind of invisible where you can sneak around and avoid meetings. The bad kind where people forget you exist until something breaks. Then suddenly everyone needs you to fix it without any credit or authority to prevent it from breaking again. At 5:30 a.m. that morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a thermos of black coffee and a stack of compliance reports thick enough to stop a bullet. Same routine I'd followed for 7 years. First call was with a Pentagon liaison who wanted to discuss tolerance specifications on a component that hadn't even reached prototype stage. I walked him through the engineering parameters like always, explaining why his suggested modifications would fail stress testing within 6 months. 20 minutes later, our Ohio facility pinged about a material shortage that could delay delivery by 3 weeks. I rerouted the supply chain through backup vendors we'd qualified 2 years ago, adjusted the production schedule, and had purchase orders cut before most people finished their first cup of coffee. Problem solved. Crisis averted. Another day at the office. This was normal. For 7 years, I was the guy who kept our biggest government contract running within spec, while everyone else chased process improvement buzzwords and reorganized org charts like deck furniture on a sinking ship. The original founder, back when he actually understood operations, once called me his load-bearing wall during a board meeting. I didn't laugh because I knew exactly what he meant. Remove me, and the whole structure would shift in ways they couldn't predict or control. The thing about being the foundation is you're invisible until someone tries to renovate without checking the blueprints. Enter Derek Harmon. He rolled into our facility like a new tool that looks impressive in the catalog, but strips threads on the first real job. Fresh MBA from some business school his daddy paid for, perfect teeth, cactus that had never seen a shop floor, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to explain why a project went sideways to people who actually know what they're talking about. His father-in-law happened to be Randolph Stone's golf partner, and that relationship had pulled enough strings to get Derek the VP of Operations title before he could read a technical specification sheet or understand why our quality checkpoints existed in the first place. I met him on his second day. He was standing in the production area trying to connect his laptop to the manufacturing network, looking lost as a tourist in a machine shop. "You must be Garrison," he said. When he saw me, "I've heard you basically run this whole account." The way he said it wasn't a compliment. It was a problem he intended to solve, like I was some kind of inefficiency that needed optimizing out of the system. At first, he played the part of the eager new executive. Awkward handshakes, asked what he thought were good questions, even complimented the system documentation I'd built from scratch. After learning the hard way that defense contracts don't forgive missing paperwork. But within 6 weeks, the real Derek started showing. Meetings I'd led for years suddenly had new ownership. Process changes that ignored contract requirements like gravity was optional. Work orders that bypassed quality checkpoints I'd established after spending 3 days explaining to federal auditors why a batch of components had failed inspection. He'd CC me on announcements affecting my team, then ghost me completely when I asked for technical clarification on changes that made no engineering sense. During one leadership sync meeting, he called my protocol's legacy maintenance thinking that's holding back innovation. I wasn't even in the room. Just heard about it from Curtis Bailey, my senior analyst, who looked like someone had backed over his dog when he told me. The worst part was people started listening to Derek because he had a title and a presentation style and a slide deck with the word optimization in 36-point font. He wore authority like a new jacket, and most of the executives, too tired or too distracted to dig into the technical details, let him redesign systems that were already running at 99.7% efficiency. You want to know the real kick in the teeth? Our system was already optimized. 7 years of incremental improvements, process refinements, and relationship building with both the client and our suppliers had created something that actually worked. But Derek saw efficiency numbers and thought he could squeeze out more performance by changing things he didn't understand. Meanwhile, I was still doing the actual job that kept the lights on, still managing the client relationship, still taking those early morning technical calls when something needed immediate attention. still reviewing deliverables line by line so nothing failed inspection and cost us penalty fees. My team knew what was happening, but we were told to align with Derek's vision and embrace the transformation. What transformation? Taking a stable, revenue-generating defense contract that had survived 3 different federal audits and feeding it into a process improvement blender operated by someone who thought synergy was a measurable metric. I didn't argue, not yet. I documented everything and kept my mouth shut, adjusting the torque wrench in my pocket whenever Derek started explaining how his business school theories would improve our operational velocity. Let the boy hang himself with his own buzzwords. But I'll admit, by the 4th time I was excluded from a client review meeting I'd been running since before Derek knew what a defense contract looked like. I could feel the tension building in my shoulders, like watching a bearing overheat, but not being allowed to shut down the machine until it seized completely. Still, I had something Derek didn't know about. Something that had been sitting in our contract file since 2017, waiting like a loaded spring under pressure. They just didn't realize how much weight that spring was holding. The first time Derek revised my maintenance schedule without consulting the engineering specs, I figured it was a rookie mistake. The second time, when he moved up a critical inspection timeline by 2 weeks without checking if the components would be ready, I thought maybe it was ego. By the third time, when he redirected a $2.3 million equipment order through his preferred vendor without verifying their compliance certifications, I realized we weren't dealing with incompetence. We were dealing with arrogance in a business suit, backed by family connections and a dangerous amount of authority over things he'd never bothered to understand. Derek didn't collaborate, he declared. One morning in early September, I logged into our system and found brand new workflow software deployed across my entire team. No pilot program, no testing phase, no integration checks with our existing quality management system, just a Slack message with the caption, "Try this out." It's more agile and should streamline our processes, more agile. The thing didn't even have version control for technical drawings, which meant if someone updated a specification, we'd have no record of what changed or why. In defense contracting, that's not just sloppy, it's potentially criminal. My team spent 4 hours that first morning just figuring out how to upload the correct CAD files into Derek's miracle software. Curtis Bailey, who'd been with me for 3 years and knew our systems inside and out, came to my office looking like he'd been asked to rebuild an engine with plastic tools. "This thing is going to cause a disaster," he said, closing the door behind him. "It doesn't track revision history. It can't handle our file formats properly, and I can't figure out how to set approval workflows that meet federal requirements." I was already documenting everything. Missing approval workflows, unclear access permissions, and API integration that had more security holes than a practice target. The risk assessment I put together was 6 pages of detailed technical problems, each one a potential contract violation that could cost us thousands in penalty fees. I sent it to Herman Clark in legal, copied Derek, and marked it high priority. Derek's response came back in exactly 20 minutes, probably typed while he was in another meeting about synergy and paradigm shifts. "We'll iterate as we go. Speed over perfection. Garrison, that's how modern companies stay competitive. Speed over perfection. Great philosophy for a pizza delivery service. Absolutely terrible approach for a multi-million-dollar defense contract with federal oversight requirements and audit trails that go back 7 years." I printed out Derek's email and filed it with my growing collection of documentation. You learn in this business that when things go wrong, the first question investigators ask is who knew this was a problem and what did they do about it. I was making sure I had clear answers to both parts of that question. But Derek was just getting started with his transformation initiative. 2 weeks later came the email that really opened my eyes to how far he was willing to push things. Department-wide distribution. Subject line Operational Excellence Phase 2, and right there in the 3rd paragraph was this little gem. Some legacy processes remain in place due to internal resistance from team members who are uncomfortable with change and innovation. Internal resistance, uncomfortable with change. He didn't mention names, but I was the only operations lead still working from the original contract specifications. It was a slap delivered with corporate speak wrapping paper, designed to make me look like a problem that needed solving. Curtis messaged me immediately after that email went out. "Was that about you?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked down to the secure filing cabinet and pulled out something I hadn't looked at in years. The original client contract, not the sanitized summary Derek had been working from, but the actual legal document with all 127 pages of specifications, requirements, and protective clauses. Because Derek had started making serious noise about outsourcing our technical oversight responsibilities to a firm in Texas. Cut overhead by 35% and look lean for the investors, he'd announced in the last leadership meeting. Never mind that our client's compliance requirements specifically mandated on-site engineering supervision. Never mind that I was personally named as the designated continuity officer. And never mind that we had a very specific clause buried on page 47 that tied the contract's continuation to my physical presence on the project. When I brought this up casually during our next project review, Derek waved it off like I was worried about nothing. We'll get the client to amend that language. It's outdated anyway, probably just boilerplate left over from the original negotiations. I asked if legal had reviewed his outsourcing plan and confirmed it wouldn't violate our existing commitments. He smiled like he was explaining basic math to a child. Legal works for us, Garrison. They'll make whatever adjustments we need to make this happen. That's when I knew Derek had never actually read the contract. He was working from executive summaries and assuming he could change whatever didn't fit his vision. But some things in business can't be optimized or synergized away, especially when they're written in legal language and signed by federal representatives who take their commitments seriously. I could have laughed at his confidence, but instead, I just made another note in my project log and sent a quiet reminder to Herman Clark with the subject line contract reference. Section 6.4b Continuity Requirements. No commentary, no urgency flags, just the clause text and a timestamp showing I'd brought it to legal's attention. After that conversation, things started moving faster. I was systematically removed from client-facing responsibilities. Derek thought he could handle better. Weekly status calls that I'd been running for 4 years suddenly had new leadership. Derek started sending Patricia Wong, our customer success manager, to represent us in meetings where technical decisions were being made. Patricia was a nice woman with good intentions, but she thought SLA meant service-level appreciation and had never read a technical specification in her life. Watching her try to discuss engineering tolerances with federal contractors was like watching someone perform surgery with a butter knife. The client noticed immediately. Walter Hudson, their facility representative and our main point of contact, started asking questions during every call. Where's Garrison? Why isn't he handling the technical review? The responses were always diplomatic variations of he's focusing on internal optimization projects right now. Internal optimization. I was sitting 30 feet away from those conference calls, listening through the speakerphone, watching 7 years of carefully built relationships get handed off to someone who never even toured our production facility. Walter had been through 3 major technical challenges with me. We'd solved problems together that had saved both companies millions in delays and rework. Now he was being told I was too busy with optimization to talk to him. The systematic erosion of my responsibilities wasn't dramatic or confrontational. It was professional and gradual and completely deliberate. Hallway conversations that stopped when I approached, calendar invites that somehow got lost in email. The quiet disappearance of my input from decisions I'd been making since before Derek learned what a defense contract looked like. I was being edited out of my own operation, one meeting at a time, but here's what Derek didn't understand about people like me. You don't spend 7 years building a system with your fingerprints on every process specification just to get sidelined by nepotism with an MBA and a PowerPoint fetish. You don't become the guy everyone calls when things break by accident. You earn that position by knowing more about how things actually work than anyone else in the building, so I stayed quiet. Let Derek restructure his org charts and optimize his workflows. Let him explain to executives how his business school theories would improve our operational velocity. I just kept doing my job, documenting everything, and waiting for the right moment to remind everyone why some foundations can't be moved without bringing down the whole building. That moment came during our quarterly client review meeting, scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday in early October. Standard agenda, contract performance metrics, delivery timelines, upcoming milestones. I'd been presenting these updates for 7 years like clockwork. Same professional format, same data-driven approach that had kept our relationship with the federal agency running smoothly through 3 different administrations. Except this time, Walter Hudson was joining in person instead of by video call. Walter was the kind of federal contractor representative you learn to respect quickly. Former Marine, 12 years with the agency, and he'd seen enough defense contractors come and go to know the difference between people who could deliver and people who just talked about delivering. We'd worked through 3 major technical challenges together over the years. When a component batch failed stress testing in 2019, Walter and I spent 4 days in our testing facility figuring out what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. When supply chain disruptions threatened to delay a critical delivery in 2020, Walter personally approved our backup vendor certifications so we could maintain our timeline. He trusted my technical assessments more than any PowerPoint presentation or executive summary. I was halfway through the delivery timeline section of my presentation, explaining why we'd adjusted the testing schedule to accommodate new federal requirements when Derek cut in. Smooth as silk, confident smile locked in place, looking directly at Walter like they were old friends planning a golf game. Actually, Garrison, this will probably be your last time presenting on this project. We're transitioning his oversight responsibilities to our new efficiency team next quarter. Then he turned to Walter with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to face real consequences. We're bringing in some fresh perspectives, streamlining the legacy processes that have been slowing us down. Should see some real improvements in turnaround time and cost efficiency. Legacy processes, the same processes that had kept this contract running at 99.7% on-time delivery for 7 years, survived 3 federal audits without a single major finding and maintained client satisfaction scores that most defense contractors would kill for. Walter didn't respond immediately. He looked at me, then at Derek, then back at me again. His expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes and the way he shifted in his chair. Walter had been through enough corporate reorganizations to recognize what was happening. So Garrison won't be our primary technical contact anymore. Walter asked, his voice neutral but with an edge that Derek completely missed. That's right, Derek said, clearly pleased with himself. We're moving to a more distributed model where multiple team members can handle client interface. Much more scalable and efficient. Walter nodded slowly. The way people do when they're processing information they don't particularly like. And this efficiency team, they have the same level of technical expertise. Oh, absolutely, Derek replied without hesitation. Plus, they're trained on the latest project management methodologies. Should be a real upgrade in terms of responsiveness and communication. I watched Walter's face during this exchange, and that's when I knew. He understood exactly what was happening. Derek was announcing my removal from a project I'd been managing successfully for 7 years, and he was doing it like it was good news, like replacing the guy who actually understood the technical requirements with a team trained in project management methodologies was somehow an improvement. I finished my presentation without commentary, clicked through the remaining slides, delivered the metrics Walter had requested, answered his technical questions with the same precision I'd used for 7 years. Professional to the end, even while watching Derek dig his own grave with enthusiasm and a smile, but inside the calculation was already running. Derek had just announced my irrelevance in front of our most important client representative. On the record, with witnesses, in a meeting that was being recorded for compliance purposes. Walter shook hands with both of us after the meeting, but his conversation with me lasted twice as long as his polite goodbye to Derek. Been good working with you all these years, Garrison, he said, and there was something in his tone that told me he understood this might be the last time we'd work together under these circumstances. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done since 2017. I opened the secure filing cabinet in my home office and pulled out my personal copy of the original client contract. Not the cleaned-up version in our shared database that had been optimized by various legal reviews over the years, but the actual document I'd helped negotiate during the crisis that almost killed this relationship. 2017 was the year everything nearly fell apart. Equipment failures, schedule delays, a supply chain disruption that threatened to put us 6 months behind schedule. The client was frustrated. Our company was scrambling. And there was serious talk about terminating the contract and finding a new vendor. I worked 72 straight hours developing a recovery plan that not only got us back on track but actually improved our delivery performance. Walter had been the point person on the client side during that crisis, and he'd been impressed enough with the turnaround to make a specific request during the contract renewal negotiations. We need stability, he'd said during one of those late-night conference calls when we were hammering out the new terms. Garrison's the reason this thing didn't collapse completely. If he's not going to be here, we need to know about it in advance so we can make other arrangements. That's how Section 6.4b got added to page 47 of our contract. Simple language, clear intent. If Garrison Wells, the designated continuity officer, voluntarily resigns his employment, client reserves the right to terminate this agreement immediately without further obligation, notice, or financial penalty. I'd forgotten about that clause over the years. It was one of dozens of protective measures we layered into the contract when everything was on fire and we were trying to rebuild trust. But there it was, still valid, still binding, still signed by representatives from both organizations, still loaded and ready to fire. I spent that evening reading through every page of the contract, not just Section 6.4b, but all the interconnected clauses that made our relationship with the federal agency work. What I found was even better than I'd remembered. The continuity clause wasn't just about my employment status. It was tied to performance metrics, compliance requirements, and penalty structures that Derek had never bothered to understand. If I resigned and the client exercised their termination option, the company wouldn't just lose the $11 million annual contract value. They'd also face a $3 million penalty for failure to maintain qualified on-site supervision, plus additional audit costs that could run another $1 million, depending on how thorough the federal investigators wanted to be. I took screenshots of every relevant page, saved PDF copies to 3 different locations, and sent encrypted backups to my personal email account. Then I did something I'd never done in 7 years of working there. I uploaded the complete original contract to our secure legal repository with a note in the metadata. Original executed version, all amendments and revisions should reference this baseline document. No alerts, no notifications, no dramatic announcements. Just made sure the truth was available for anyone who bothered to look for it. The next morning, I followed my normal routine with one small change. I made my coffee at exactly the right temperature, drove to the facility, and cleaned out my desk before anyone else arrived. Stress ball, photo of my nephew playing Little League, my coffee thermos with the dent from when I dropped it during the 219 crisis, and that shop rag I'd been carrying in my back pocket since my days as a floor technician. Left everything organized and labeled. Even wiped down the keyboard and calibrated the desk phone so whoever came after me would start with a clean workspace. At 6:47 a.m., I opened my email and composed the shortest resignation letter of my career. Resignation effective immediately per contract terms. Reference Section 6.4b attached. Sent to Herman Clark in legal, Patricia Wong in HR, and Derek Harmon in operations. No explanation, no emotional appeals, no bridge burning. Just clean documentation and a contract reference that would explain everything to anyone who took the time to read it. By the time first shift started arriving, I was already gone. They found my security badge centered on the mousepad, my project files organized in clearly labeled folders, and a work area that looked like it had been prepared for a federal inspection. Curtis Bailey was the first person to notice something was wrong. He called my cell phone at 8:15, voice tight with concern. "Garrison, your entire desk is cleared out." "What's going on? Did something happen?" "Check your email," I told him, "and maybe take a look at Section 6.4b of the client contract." The real contract, not the summary version. He did. Within 2 hours, the legal repository was showing views from multiple IP addresses as people started reading the original contract for the first time in years. Herman Clark was in emergency session with senior management by 10 a.m. Derek was probably still trying to figure out what Section 6.4b even meant. Walter Hudson received official notification of my resignation through federal channels at 11:30 a.m. His response was swift and professional. No angry phone calls, no demands for explanation, no attempts at negotiation. Just a formal letter invoking the termination clause and requesting final deliverables within 30 days. Derek tried to salvage the situation, of course. Made frantic calls to Walter's office, offered to bring me back as a consultant, promised a smooth transition with full documentation transfer. But Walter had been through enough contractor changes to know that some relationships can't be rebuilt once they've been deliberately broken. "Your company removed our designated technical contact from the project," Walter explained during what I later heard was a very brief conversation with Derek. "Section 6.4b gives us the right to terminate immediately under those circumstances. We're exercising that option." Derek's response was everything I expected. Demands to know why nobody had told him about the clause, accusations that I'd sabotaged the relationship, threats to fight the termination through legal channels. But Herman Clark had already confirmed that the clause was valid, binding, and entirely Derek's fault for activating it. The aftermath moved quickly. Within 48 hours, Randolph Stone's company had lost an $11 million annual contract, faced a $3 million compliance penalty, and triggered additional audit requirements that would cost them at least another $1 million in legal fees and administrative overhead. Derek wasn't fired immediately, but his authority evaporated like morning fog. Stripped of project oversight, reassigned to strategic planning responsibilities that didn't seem to involve any actual strategy or planning. His parking space got reassigned to someone who could actually read a contract before making decisions about it. The company tried to win the business back naturally. 6 months later, they submitted a new proposal with revised management structure and updated processes. Walter reviewed it professionally and sent back a standard rejection letter. "Thank you for your submission. We're satisfied with our current contractor arrangements." Because by then, I was already working for the company that had won the rebid. Walter called me 3 days after my resignation became official. "You available for some consulting work, Garrison?" "Depends on the client," I said, even though we both knew I was interested. "Same client, different prime contractor. We need someone who actually understands how to run a defense contract without trying to optimize it into failure." I negotiated my rate, set my terms, and started the following Monday. Same work, same facility, same client relationships, but now I reported to people who understood that some systems work precisely because they've been designed by people who know what they're doing. The best part? Derek's replacement lasted exactly 3 months before the new management realized that running a defense contract requires more than PowerPoint skills and business school theories. They ended up hiring Curtis Bailey to take over operations, and he's been doing the job the way I taught him ever since. Last weekend, I went bass fishing at the lake where I'd planned to go that Wednesday morning when everything changed. Water was calm, phone stayed in the truck, and for the first time in months, I didn't have to listen to anyone explain why my 7 years of experience needed improvement from someone who'd never read a technical manual. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's just walking away at exactly the right moment and letting physics handle the rest. Derek learned that lesson the expensive way, and I got to watch it happen from a comfortable distance with a fishing rod in my hands and absolutely no regrets about the timing. You know what? Nobody tells you about being indispensable. The moment you have to prove you're indispensable, you've already lost. Real power isn't in making yourself irreplaceable. It's in being so good at what you do that when you leave, everyone finally understands what they had. The foundation doesn't fight the renovation. It just stops supporting the weight and lets gravity do what gravity always does.